Tonight, scam crackdown. Banks and tech companies told to protect customers or face huge fines under proposed tough new laws. Yuma, good evening. I'm Adrienne coming to you from Ngunnawal country, and we also acknowledge others with connections to the lands of the ACT. This is ABC News. Also tonight, it's on. The ACT election campaign officially begins as we head to the October 19 election. Russia launches a counter-offensive in Kursk, claiming it started to recapture territory. And walking on, a US billionaire and his crew carry out the first all-civilian spacewalk. Tech companies, banks and telcos could face massive fines if they fail to protect their customers from scams. They'll also be up for compensation to victims under new laws proposed by the Albanese government.
Just weeks before buying his first property, Ilya Fomin lost $280,000 to a scam.
It was such a huge shock, you do not feel much.
Criminals stole his money after they emailed him impersonating his lawyer. He believes the two banks used to shift the funds could have done more.
They didn't check neither the address nor the name, and they just let the money go.
His bank maintains it did nothing wrong.
I believe that if our people had seen those red flags, they absolutely would not have processed the payment.
Banks will have to ensure that they are confirming the identity of a payee when a transfer is being made.
With Australians losing billions every year, the government is demanding action from banks, telcos and tech companies.
We'll ensure that Australia is leading the world in the fight against scams.
New obligations will cover how to prevent, detect, report, disrupt and respond. If companies fail, they could be forced to pay compensation and fined up to $50 million. The banks pushed hard to have other sectors on the hook. Telcos will have to combat dodgy texts and calls, and digital platforms verify advertisers. Both will also be liable.
It's more likely to prevent scams from ever starting, and it's a much fairer way of attributing liability.
Consumer groups have reacted positively, but are pushing to ensure most victims are repaid.
A model that incentivises businesses to fortify their systems and protect their customers.
Key details, including exactly what this means for future scam victims, is still being worked out. But despite that, the government wants to pass the laws this year. Michael Atkin, ABC News.
An inquiry into the unlawful robo-debt scheme has found that a dozen public servants breached their code of conduct 97 times. The Public Service Commissioner has made findings against 12 current and former staff, with sanctions imposed against 4 who remain employed with the department. The Commissioner says former Department Secretary Catherine Campbell failed to seek legal advice and created a culture that prevented robo-debt being scrutinised. The report also made findings against former Secretary Renee Leon, who is now the Vice-Chancellor of Charles Sturt University. The robo-debt scandal led to $1.7 billion in debt being unlawfully collected from millions of social security recipients.
The vast majority of public servants are good people, working hard to serve you, the community, every day. Public servants made mistakes. We can't change what happened, but we can learn from it and work together to make sure those mistakes won't happen again.
The ACT government has gone into caretaker mode, signalling the official start of the election campaign. For the next 5 weeks, candidates will hit the hustings to earn Canberrans' votes on October 19. ACT political reporter Patrick Bell is at the Legislative Assembly tonight. Patrick, how did the first day of campaigning play out?
Well, Adi, it was a reasonably low-key first day of the campaign. Labor was out spruiking its plans for a new Northside hospital, which we've known about since last year, and also some more parking spaces it's promised at the Canberra hospital. The Liberals had a big week with their commitment to a new stadium in the city. Today, they announced they'd introduce a strata and building commissioner if they win the election. The Greens raised some eyebrows today with the declaration that they're in this campaign to try and make Shane Rattenbury Chief Minister and to be the largest party in any future government. Now, that would require quite an increase in the Green vote, and so just how likely that is a little bit unclear.
And Patrick, what kind of a campaign do you think we can expect?
I think it differs depending on the parties and candidates. Labor, after 23 years in office, will be out to prove it's the tested and steady hand. And so while we will see some new commitments, I think Labor is likely to lean quite a bit on policies it's already announced and which it has budgeted. The Liberals too have announced a few of their major policies already, though have kept a couple up their sleeve for the campaign. Now, as well as the Greens, we also have, of course, a number of independents vying to snatch seats in the Assembly at this election, and for many of them it's their first campaign. So exactly what dynamic that will bring, it's hard to tell at this point. Tomorrow, though, a very important set piece for the Labor Party with its official campaign launch.
ACT political reporter Patrick Bell, thank you. It's been described as a once-in-a-generation reform for aged care, allowing more Australians access to support at home. But the proposed scheme comes at a cost, with some recipients having to contribute thousands of dollars more each year.
Sue Watts lives alone in the suburbs of Hobart, but twice a week the 70-year-old gets a helping hand from a support worker.
For services such as domestic cleaning and help to get to medical appointments.
Home care packages allow people like Sue to maintain independence at home rather than rely on residential care.
If I didn't have them, I'd feel really lost and alone. I don't have a lot of family to support me.
But the home care system is under severe strain, with a growing wait list of more than 60,000 people.
I know of a case at the moment of a 95-year-old woman who is being told she's going to have to wait a year just to be assessed. At 95, she doesn't have a year to wait.
The federal government has now unveiled a multi-billion-dollar reform package to expand access to an extra 300,000 people over the next decade. Home care packages involve three types of service categories: clinical care such as nursing and physiotherapy, support for independence like respite and transport, and everyday living including cleaning, meals delivery and gardening. Under the proposed Support at Home scheme, recipients wouldn't have to contribute any funds for clinical care, but the other categories would be means tested, meaning a part pensioner would pay between 5 and 50% of independent services, while a self-funded retiree would cover 80% of everyday living services. A no worse off principle would apply for those already receiving support, but some new recipients would have to contribute thousands of dollars each year.
And the reality is we do have people who are utilising aged care that do have significant super balances, who do have assets.
There's not enough information. I don't know, I'm really scared. I don't know how much more I'm going to have to find.
The government wants the reforms in place by mid-next year. Jono Gibson, ABC News.
The Defence Minister is being accused of throwing lower-ranked army officers under the bus with his decision to strip medals over alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. Richard Marles is standing by the move, today hitting out at anti-war protesters, again trying to disrupt an international weapons expo in Melbourne. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
An anti-war protester cements her arm to a car and blocks the entrance to Melbourne's Kingsway Bridge.
Land forces will be abolished!
Police eventually chisel her free. One of several activists still trying to disrupt a weapons fair where the Defence Minister was today the VIP guest.
Difficult decisions require leadership, That's what I've done as the Minister for Defence.
Attending the International Land Forces Expo,
they're all high explosive as well.
Richard Marles defends his decision this week to strip several Army officers of medals for alleged Afghanistan war crimes that occurred under their command.
Well, why is it okay to throw sort of lower ranked diggers under the bus, but those who are higher up the chain avoid any scrutiny?
The former Defence Minister turned opposition leader also attacking the timing of the long-awaited announcement so soon after the Veteran Suicide Royal Commission.
I think Richard Marles really has done a great disservice here to the Australian Defence Force.
Whenever we were doing it, it was going to be a difficult moment.
With the three-day weapons convention now finished, the government has taken aim at those who've used violence in the protests outside, describing their actions as utterly unacceptable. Today, anti-war activists were joined by a Green senator.
I'd say to Richard Marles, have the courage and come out and speak to the people who vote for you, not the multinationals who you want a job from when you leave politics.
This year, we have watched the Greens throw their lot in with thuggery time and time again.
And he insists those in the weapons trade are actually keeping every Australian safe. Andrew Green, ABC News, Melbourne.
Bruce Lehrmann's lawyers have filed an updated appeal claim against a ruling by Federal Court Judge Michael Lee that on the balance of probabilities he did rape Brittany Higgins at Parliament House in 2019. Bruce Lehrmann filed the first appeal notice himself after losing his defamation case against Network 10 over an interview with Brittany Higgins. His version challenged key parts of the ruling, but now his lawyers have broadened that to include the whole judgment. They will argue Justice Lee's ruling on the truth defence was not the same as the truth case argued by 10. Bruce Lehrmann has maintained his innocence with his criminal trial abandoned with no findings against him. Ukraine says Russia has begun a counter-offensive, taking back territory after Kyiv's cross-border incursion in the Kursk region. It comes as the Red Cross confirms the death of 3 aid workers killed by Russian shelling in the eastern Donetsk region. Rani Heyman filed this report.
5 weeks after Ukraine infiltrated Russia's eastern border, Moscow says it's recapturing territory after Kyiv's surprise incursion last month.
The Russians have begun counter-offensive actions. It goes according to our Ukrainian plan.
But within Ukraine, Russia continues to gain ground, pushing further into the Sumy region with energy infrastructure targeted. South in the Donetsk region, 3 workers for the International Committee of the Red Cross were killed in a strike. The aid agency hasn't said who it believes is behind the attack, but Ukraine has accused Russia of committing a war crime. It comes as US Secretary of State Antony Blinken finished a multi-country trip focused on the war.
What we learn from our Ukrainian partners will inform discussions that we'll be having with other allies.
We should continue to deliver advanced air defense systems and also, in our opinion, lift restrictions on the use of long-range weapons.
The question of whether the US will change its mind to allow Ukraine to use Western-supplied long-range weapons against targets inside Russia could soon be answered. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is on his way to meet US President Joe Biden at the White House.
This will mean that NATO countries, the United States and European countries are fighting Russia.
A warning, a change of strategy from the West would lead to dangerous escalation on the battlefield. Rani Heyman, ABC News, London.
US Vice President Kamala Harris has challenged Donald Trump to another televised debate, saying they owe it to the voters. With 54 days to go until the American election in November, the Democrat Vice President narrowly leads the polls. Debates between presidential candidates are typically an important part of the US election process. But Trump says he will not participate in another one after facing President Joe Biden back in June and then Harris earlier this week, insisting he won the Philadelphia showdown, which was watched by more than 67 million people.
As everyone saw 2 nights ago, we had a monumental victory over Comrade Kamala Harris. So because we've done 2 debates and because they were successful, there will be no third debate.
While ChatGPT is banned in many schools, generative AI apps that are tailored to the curriculum are being used routinely in some classrooms. An AI pilot in New South Wales will soon be expanded to all public school teachers. It's the second state after South Australia to test its own in-house AI tool, with WA receiving funding for its own pilot. Many experts say AI has the potential to address some of the biggest challenges in education, but a considered approach is needed.
You've got to kind of treat it like a regular human being.
These Year 10 students have been using generative AI for months, and it's transformed the way they learn.
I think I've had to think about it more and sort of had to accustom myself to it, because obviously a lot of jobs in the future are going to want it. So it's important that I learn it now.
The New South Wales Department of Education's in-house AI tool looks like any other messaging platform. It's modelled on ChatGPT but built specifically for the state's curriculum, and it won't write your essays or help you cheat.
It's like it's providing us the why but not giving us the entire answer.
For teachers, it's being used to help reduce admin work.
I've been using it for lesson designs and stuff like that and getting ideas to create lessons for different syllabus dot points.
Late last year, federal and state governments released a national plan for generative AI in schools, which it says should ensure it's used responsibly and ethically. It's a battle many schools and universities are now facing, balancing the need to adapt with the technology, but also proceed with caution.
There's a huge responsibility and a huge opportunity for our schooling system to develop capable young adults who will be able to engage with AI without fear and with a really strong sense of responsibility and ethical understandings of how to use it.
Unfortunately, this is the way the world's going. It's more of a conversation about how we're future-proofing their kids and how we're making them future-proof. So when they go into employment opportunities outside of school, they are set up for their future.
A federal inquiry into the use of generative AI in schools has recommended it be treated as a national priority and to ensure potential risks are urgently addressed.
The really sort of significant ways in which we'll develop our curriculum over the next few years will be when are the right times to use AI to enhance the learning, when are the times to step away from AI and to practice on, for example, times tables before you're allowed to use calculators.
If our kids aren't gaining access to these tools and learning how to use these tools across Australia, then we as a country are going to be left behind.
The New South Wales Government is now calling on the Commonwealth to help fund its trial, which it will expand to all public school teachers by the end of the year. Chantel Alcouri, ABC News, Sydney.
And now to tonight's Stateline interview. The ACT Labor Party has held power in the capital for 23 years. During the past term, Labor has been in minority government in partnership with the Greens. With independents gaining prominence in the last federal election, how might the ACT government look after October 19? Here's James Glenday.
With the ACT government now in caretaker mode, Canberra's Legislative Assembly has fallen quiet and staff have begun preparing for the next term. The mace has been removed from the chamber and locked away, the lights turned off and the doors shut. Even the artwork in ministerial offices is getting put into storage until the new occupants move in. As for the politicians, Labor Chief Minister Andrew Barr and Liberal Opposition Leader Elizabeth Lee have got just 36 more days to convince Canberrans that they should lead the territory for the next 4 years. There are 5 electorates in the ACT and each elects 5 members. Right now, Labor holds 10 of the 25 seats and governs with the Greens, who hold 6. The Canberra Liberals have 9 and history is against them. Labor has held power since 2001 and the Liberals have been in government for just 8 of the 35 years since May 1989. So, will Andrew Barr, who has served as Chief Minister for nearly a decade, savour the taste of victory again? Or are things about to change? Anthony Green is the ABC's Chief Election Analyst.
Anthony Green, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Labor has ruled Canberra for 23 years now. Can you put this in some more context for us? Are there many other state or territory governments that have lasted longer?
Oh, I had the coalition in Queensland last 32 years, and then we had The Bolte government, Liberals in Victoria, went for 27, but that was a much quieter political period in the post-war era, because you got those sorts of governments. I mean, the pace of politics has picked up nationally and around the country in the last 2 decades, except in the ACT, where we seem to have this forever government that Labor provides the chief minister, and we've had a variety of minority Labor governments, majority Labor governments, and Labor Green sort of working governments.
Yeah, Andrew Barr has been Chief Minister for nearly 10 years now. Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister when he got the job. How unique does that make Mr Barr in the current crop of political leaders that we've got across the country?
Oh, I think another way to look at it is Andrew Barr is the only member remaining head of government that sat metaphorically around the national cabinet table during COVID. Every other Prime Minister, Premier and Chief Minister has moved on.
The ACT, of course, Anthony, uses the proportional Hare-Clark system, which means the major parties are confident of getting between 9 and 11 seats generally, and then they're hoping they can rely on friendly crossbenchers. How difficult is it then for the Canberra Liberals to unseat Labor? What sort of vote percentage and things to go right do they actually need?
Well, they actually need to uppoll Labor for a start. I mean, you've got to have roughly the same vote to get at least the same number of seats. The Liberal Party tends to, you know, the Labor Party and the Greens, while they're competing for a seat often, if one of them misses out, they usually help the other party win the Labor for a third seat or the Greens a first seat. The Liberals are stuck at struggling to get beyond 2. They've occasionally got 3 in Brindabella. That's been their problem, and their vote is traditionally lower than Labor, and that makes it harder for them to win. When they did govern under Kate Carnell back in the 90s, in that era, Labor was going through a bit of a dark period after losing federal office, and there were various factional problems in the Labor Party in the ACT at the time. But there were also some Conservative independents elected. Michael Moore was elected, Paul Osborne, Dave Rugendijk, and they were able to help Kate Carnell, who never got a majority for the Liberal Party in her own right, to form a functioning government. Since then, the only other party that's been elected to the Assembly, I think there was one Democrat, but all the others have been Greens. There hasn't been somebody else elected to the crossbench who might support a Liberal government. Plus, the Liberal Party vote has just continued to decline. It just hasn't risen. And if you look at Senate elections, it's just declined. So the last ACT Senate election, the Liberal vote fell to 25%, which doesn't augur well for how they'll go at the ACT Legislative Assembly election.
Yeah, and at that last federal election, as a result of that low vote, the independent Senator David Pocock was able to snatch a spot from the Liberal Party. He has since encouraged a local crop of independents to run. Do they have a chance? What do they need to do to be successful?
Well, it's interesting to look at the dynamics of the Senate contest. It was always one Labor guaranteed, one Liberal guaranteed, and the Greens tried many times to win that seat, but they couldn't force the Liberal vote down below a third, so they never got a look in. When David Pocock came along as an independent, he took votes from both the Liberal Party and the Greens and got elected on Green preferences. So he won the second seat. In the same way that many Teals have won Liberal seats. They take votes from Labor, Liberal and Greens to get up. I think what we've seen around the country in recent years is when there is a serious competitive independent running, sometimes the Green vote is eroded.
Now, of course, this is no surprise. Canberra is a city that is usually very focused on what's happening up at Parliament House. And of course, a lot of people are working for the Federal Public Service as well. How much, Anthony, does federal politics, whoever's governing at a national level, play into the ACT political landscape?
I think it has at the past. I'm not sure it does at the moment. I think the Liberal Party locally has got a few black marks against it because of what's happened in federal politics under various things, attempts to try and get the federal government to intervene on various issues in the ACT because it was a territory. So I think there's a few issues there which are in play, which means I don't think the course of federal politics of Labor being in government is necessarily going to hurt the Barr government.
Just finally, Anthony, we're going to be together for election night at the National Museum on the 19th of October. The ACT system, as you were just alluding to, is a bit unique. Just tell us, how quickly will those results come in, and how soon will we get an idea of who has actually won this election?
Well, because the ACT has moved very much, it did during COVID and is continuing this time, moved away from the concept of a polling day to a polling period. You can still vote on the day, but only 22% of people voted on polling day at the last election. In the ACT, all the pre-polls are taken electronically. And at about 5 minutes past 6, they get released as a couple of big batches. So before 7 o'clock, we basically have 3/4, 2/3, 3/4 of the vote counted. And then about an hour later, we get the first distribution of preferences, which gives an indication of which candidates are elected. But really, realistically, we'll know very quickly whether the Liberal Party vote is improved, whether the Labor's taken a hit, whether the Green vote's holding up. We'll know that very quickly in the coverage. The rest of the night is taken up with trying to figure out which of those candidates on the ballot paper get elected.
All right, Anthony Green, I'm looking forward to it. We'll see you in a few weeks' time.
Can't wait.
Forget about space tourism. Now there's an even bigger thrill for the ultra-wealthy: spacewalking. History has been made with the first civilians to step into space. The mission was funded by a billionaire who launched himself and his 3-person crew into orbit aboard a privately funded rocket.
Orbiting 700 kilometres above Earth, the Polaris Dawn crew of 4 prepare the right conditions for the risky operation.
All the extensive training that they've gone through to get to this point, this has been years in the making.
For the first time, a space crew was going out of a craft without the safety of an airlock. Mission leader Jared Isaacman opted to open the hatch manually.
SpaceX copies, hatch open.
The helmet cam vision of tech billionaire Jared Isaacman, who funded the mission, shows a perfect view of our blue planet.
Back at home, we all have a lot of work to do, but from here, Earth sure looks like a perfect world.
The other astronaut out of the Dragon capsule hatch was SpaceX engineer Sarah Gillis. Their spacewalk was the highest ever executed, hundreds of kilometres above even the International Space Station.
They have gone further from Earth than anyone since the Apollo missions. They're about 1,400 kilometers away at peak. The space station's only about 550 kilometers.
The mission has been 2 years in the making and is breaking new ground.
The riskiest part of it is that you threw away your atmosphere and then you have to rebuild it after the mission. There is no airlock.
The Polaris Dawn spacewalk is testing new technology as well as marking a milestone for private space exploration.
SpaceX has these huge ambitions of getting to Mars and making life multiplanetary. And in order to get there, we need to start somewhere.
Pushing the boundaries and preparing for a safe re-entry in 2 days' time. Jenny Lavelle, ABC News.
Disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein has been indicted on additional sex crime charges. Details about the new accusations will remain sealed and confidential until his arraignment next week. Manhattan prosecutors are preparing to retry the former Hollywood producer after his original New York rape conviction was overturned in April. Back in 2020, Weinstein was found guilty, but the New York Court of Appeals threw out the conviction, citing that he did not get a fair trial. Weinstein remains in custody, but inside a New York hospital where he is recovering from heart surgery. Turning to finance, gold miners have propped up the share market while interest rate cuts overseas are driving the precious metal to new heights. Here's David Chow.
The price of gold is now at its highest level ever, which is bad news if you're thinking of proposing anytime soon. But great if you happen to own lots of gold that's locked up somewhere. It's partly because of safe haven demand and the fact interest rates are coming down, which is a sign that the global economy is struggling. Last night, the European Central Bank cut its deposit rate for the second time in 3 months. It's also because Europe is a lot closer than we are when it comes to bringing inflation down closer to 2%. And the US Federal Reserve will be next in line. The Fed will most likely cut rates by 25 basis points next week. But no such luck for Australia's Reserve Bank, as our first rate cut isn't fully priced in until February. At this stage, markets are betting the RBA will cut rates 4 or 5 times by the end of next year, while the US is looking at 10 rate cuts. So with that in mind, gold miners were today's best performers, while lithium and banking stocks tumbled. All up, the All Ords rose by 0.4% today and is close to a record high, while the share market is up 1.3% for the week. Now overseas, Wall Street and European markets did well, while Japan and China went backwards. Now back to gold, its spot price has risen to a record $2,564 an ounce, while oil prices jumped 2.5% as Hurricane Francine is causing quite a bit of disruption to oil producers in the US. And finally, the Aussie dollar is buying 67.2 US cents. And that's finance.
Canterbury winger Josh Addo-Carr has returned a second positive drug test, according to New South Wales Police. It comes after he allegedly failed his initial roadside drug test in Sydney a week ago, which led him to stand down ahead of Sunday's elimination final.
The Bulldogs had hoped the worst of this week was behind them this morning.
It's all done and dusted now, so yeah, we're really lucky it was at the start of the week and everyone knew what was going on after that.
But police received the results of star winger Josh Addo-Carr's secondary roadside drug test this afternoon, which also returned a positive reading to cocaine. The 29-year-old stood down from Sunday's elimination final earlier in the week, but strongly maintains his innocence.
Despite the fact that Josh maintains that he has never knowingly ingested any illegal drugs, he has decided to pay the infringement and bring this matter to an end legally.
In a statement, the club says the Bulldogs are committed to following the appropriate protocols and will work with the NRL Integrity Unit, the player and his management team throughout further investigations. Our focus remains steadfast on preparation for Sunday's match. Meanwhile, all eyes will be on the 2022 Dally M medalist Nicho Hynes in tomorrow afternoon's game against the Storm in Melbourne. While he hasn't been at his best in Cronulla's past two final series, coach Craig Fitzgibbons says he'd be silly to pin his finals hopes on one player.
Hynes dives in.
If you don't have a whole team performance, it won't matter how well Nicho plays. So I think his team needs to play well, and I'm pretty confident Nicho will play for the team. And if our team's playing well, you'll see the best of him.
Further north, the Cowboys are relishing their increased celebrity status in Queensland's tropics.
I've been stopped and encouraged more so in the last 2 weeks than, say, the 20 weeks beforehand. So it means something to our town and club, and that's the part that I really enjoy.
Today's captain's run marked the end of their preparations ahead of tomorrow night's do-or-die clash against the Knights on home turf. Anthea Moody, ABC News.
Australia remains unbeaten in the group stage of the Davis Cup finals after defeating Czechia 3-0 in Valencia. Thanasi Kokkinakis won the opening match over Jakub Mensik 6-2, 6-7, 6-3. Alexei Poprin then secured victory for Australia after Thomas Mahuch retired hurt. Max Purcell and Matthew Ebden finished the clean sweep with a 6-4, 6-2 win over Mensik and Adam Pavlicek in the doubles. Australia face Spain on Sunday. To the weather now and your observations of the Aurora Australis last night. Thanks to Liam of Barton for sharing his view looking over Western Creek and Molonglo Valley from the Arboretum. And on Floriade Eve, Lee Byrne of Park shared their colourful mid-morning walk around Lake Burley Griffin. Don't forget to share your observations in landscape orientation. After a low of -2 north side and 0 in the valley, we reached a sunny top of 17 today. Around the capital, Perisher began with -7 and -4 for Thredbo. Along the coast, Nowra reached a top of 19 and 17 was the top in Moruya. Across the capitals, it was wet for Melbourne and Hobart. Meanwhile, Broome reached a sizzling top of 40 degrees and Darwin 37. The satellite shows cloud over eastern New South Wales and southeast Queensland in a weakening trough, causing isolated showers. Cloud over the northwest and interior in a weak trough is causing patchy light rain. And cloud crossing Tasmania with a cold front is bringing showers. Cloud over southwest Western Australia in moist winds is bringing the odd shower. Tomorrow, sunshine across much of the western half of the nation, but to the east it's looking wet for Cairns, Melbourne and Hobart. Closer to home, snow showers are forecast for our alpine region and showers for much of the remainder. There's also a marine strong wind warning for the Illawarra, Batemans and Eden coasts and a sheep graziers warning for the Illawarra South Coast, Southern Tablelands, Southwest Slopes, Snowy Mountains and the ACT. After a low of 0 with patches of frost and the chance of fog, Canberra can expect a partly cloudy day with a top of 18 and a high chance of showers in the afternoon and evening. Light winds becoming west to northwesterly 20 to 30 kilometres an hour in the middle of the day, then shifting southerly 15 to 25 kilometres per hour in the evening. The sun will rise at 6 a.m. and set at 5:58 p.m. Looking ahead, Canberra can expect a low of 0 on Sunday before a partly cloudy top of 14. Areas of morning frost Monday and Tuesday, sunny and 19 on Wednesday, cloudy with a top of 17 degrees on Thursday. And that is the very latest ABC News for this Friday evening. From me, Adrienne Francis, thanks for your company. Yara, good night.